Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Commissioners' meeting this morning. If you will, if you'll please join me for a moment of silent prayer. Amen. Now, if you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comments. Ms. Elaine Flagg.
I request that this be recorded verbatim also. Name's Lynn Claggett, reside at 108 J Lane, Providence, North Carolina. The 2020 budget audit deficiencies included a recommendation for management to develop, oversee, and evaluate services performed and accept responsibility for the results. Last Board of Commissioners meeting on January 3rd, you approved a financial service contract with Isley, the CPA. The contract for the first $30,000 at a rate of $210 per hour plus benefits would pay for approximately 17 days of work. The finance director, the retired finance director, and the newer assistant finance director apparently need more expertise, quote, to help straighten this out as well. Finance budget increased 160% over the past 2 years, from $233,000 to $377,000. The county manager also referenced the growing number of public record requests. Questions I asked December 30th, 2021 were, what is the cost of the 2021 fiscal year budget audit? When will it be available to the public? How many days do you anticipate services for Mr. Isley in the next 6 months? And does Ms. Vaughn continue to receive equivalent of full-time pay? These are not hard questions, and answers should be require a sum of 50 words or less. Questions were ignored, resubmitted January 6th, and commissioners were copied. The response from Mr. Miller was, currently we are working on several projects and several FOIA requests. We will process your request as soon as possible. Another 2 weeks of being ignored, these questions were resubmitted on January 20th in a more formal FOIA format. An additional question was added seeking how much the Castle County government has paid for legal and attorney fees over the past 2 years. IRS required this information by January 31st, so it should be readily accessible. On January 28th, you identified better communication with the public as a need, yet failed to even mention the lack of replies for public information requests. After that meeting, Commissioner Dickerson inquired on the status of my FOIA request, stating, I have spoken to Brian about this. He says that some of the information is not public record, and only the finance department has some of it, and they're busy with other issues they're dealing with. So that part will take longer. That was 2 weeks ago. I do not know which information is not public, as there has been zero communication from the manager or finance in over a month. The budget audit and its costs should be public. County employee and consultant pay information from 1099 line 1, gross distribution, or W-2 wages and compensation will suffice and should be public. Legal fees for additional specific cases such as election districts should be itemized in the budget and be public. Commissioners, ignoring FOIA requests is not a software problem. The questions aren't going away, and I'm not sure why you're not asking the same questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. There's no one else that signed up at this time. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? If not, we will move on to recognitions.
Any recognitions? No.
Mr. Jeffries?
No.
No, sir.
All right. With none, we will move on to approval of the agenda.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the agenda. We will do a roll call voting. Mr. Dickerson? Mr. Howell? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Owen?
Aye.
Mr. Ostrowski? Is Mr. Carter with us?
No.
And McVeigh, aye. Motion carries. Then we'll move on to the approval of the consent agenda, A and B. We have a motion
Second.
and a second. All those in favor, we'll do it with roll call voting. Mr. Dickerson? Mr. Howell? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Owen? Mr. Ostrowski? McVeigh, aye. Motion carries. Discussion items, Project Seed update, Dr. Senegal.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy New Year to some of you all. I have a short deck that I'd like to use as the framework for giving an update on the Center for Educational and Agricultural Development, or otherwise known as SEED. Perfect, right? So on the next slide, just as sort of a level set to remind you about what our mission, what the focus of SEED is all about, it's really about three things: about educating, incubating, and building, and really leaning into our agricultural community. And so what you'll see here is the mission statement that we've developed in cooperation and with input from lots of citizens throughout Caswell County. As for the next slide, it talks a little bit about just sort of level setting where we are. These are things that you're already familiar with in terms of what are the statistics for Caswell County that we will leverage on behalf of the SEED project. Everything from the fact of our tier level to some of our health statistics, and to actually the proximity of where Pelham is. So if you'll go to that next slide. And you'll also note that we have a high percentage of our farmers who are actually African American. We have the distinction of being fourth in the entire state in terms of the number of farmers of color that we have. And so doing everything possible to lean into this audience and to really ensure that agriculture has a future in this community is what the SEED project is really all about. Again, as a level set on the next slide, we'll talk just to remind you that this isn't a project that we just woke up one morning and dreamed of. This was a project where we took the input of lots of different members throughout this community over a long period of time. We also recognize that part of the SEED project is actually part of Caswell County's economic development plan. It's a nice fit on a number of different levels, not only for education, but for health, but also for agriculture. And so these are just some of the visits and just a reminder about what planning went into where we are today with the SEED project. So if you go to the next slide, since that time of planning, we've been able to pull together a number of partners. And so if you take a look at the screen now, you'll notice that we have partners, everyone from Danville Regional Foundation, who has put in for 40% of the overall grant costs as they existed in 2019. Our public health community, one of the spaces that will be in the educational building is actually a space where we'll train frontline health workers, and when it's not used in that capacity, it'll be available as a health department, as a clinic, so that residents in that area will have better access to health care. We've also worked with Cooperative Extension. Because we have been waiting to put together all the funding, we wanted to make some progress in agriculture. And so one of the things that we were able to start at Stony Creek Elementary School was a BLAST program. And that's working with elementary school students, with our ag staff, with Extension, with the 4-H program to go ahead and start getting elementary students excited about agriculture. We literally have to go ahead and start planting seeds in order to ensure that the future of agriculture in our community plays out the way that we know it should. You'll also notice we've got Piedmont Progressive Farmers listed there, Community Food Lab, Economic Development, and even 4P. And the partnership with 4P is critical for us because they're actually going to be the organization that will run the food distribution hub, which is another key component of this project. And the idea there with 4P is that this is a company that already has business contracts to sell agricultural goods all up and down the East Coast. They've already started working with farmers here locally, and as a result of that partnership, have been able to increase the amount that farmers are getting for their eggs already. And see, we haven't even started it. We're very close to being ready to start turning some of the earth there. So I wanted to just sort of show you this picture of all the different partners and highlight some of the ways in which they're contributing to the project. If you go to the next slide, this is where I'll spend a little bit of time. This is the picture of the overall project itself. You'll notice that it's got 4 different shades of color in there. If you'll notice on the red side of the map, that's where we'll have the incubator farm plots. And thanks to the North Carolina Tobacco Commission, we'll be able to go ahead and start preparing those sites so that we are ready to actually plant. For this time next year, our ag students will be able to begin actually producing crops on that site. In addition to the work on the incubator farm plots, we'll also be doing work on the infrastructure for the overall site. That's all part of phase 1. Phase 2 goes into getting the educational building built. And again, the education building isn't just for farming, but it's also preparing students to learn how to do CDL truck driver training. There's a partnership for health. We're also preparing people to do small equipment repair because you can't run a farm without knowing how to make minor equipment repairs. And we'll also have some general studies courses, but primarily this is for students who want to do hands-on learning because we know that it's so important to prepare people in that avenue. The third phase will go into making sure that there's a trail system. Those have already been marked by our local Parks and Recreation Department. And then we've also got space there for future retail. There's also space there for things like honeybees, for greenhouses. There are a couple different water features that are on the site as well. And so just lots of different opportunities. But the idea is to develop this entire site so that it's not only good for agriculture, but it's good for education and it's good for health. That's the idea. So you might be wondering, what are some of the costs associated with a project like this? And that's where the next slide talks about what those costs are. So for phase 1 in general numbers, it's around $10 million for that first phase. The good news is that we've already raised around $8.9 million. And I would also remind you that in 2019, when we did an initial study or estimate for what it would cost for this, our original framework was somewhere between $8 and $12 million for the entirety of developing this site. A couple of things have happened since that time. The first thing is that we, after doing the architectural and engineering study for the site, we realized that the site needed more infrastructure work that was not included in the original estimate of cost, right? That was the first thing. The second thing is that the cost for refrigeration associated with the food hub, which we discovered by talking with many community groups is a critical need, those costs were also not included. And then the third thing that was really a sucker punch to all of us is the fact that construction costs have more than doubled since 2019, right? And so when we combine these factors, it's led to an increase in the overall cost of the project. The good news is that we've got lots of support for this project. We're still actively fundraising for it. We had a very positive meeting yesterday with the Secretary of Agriculture here in North Carolina. He's given us some additional leads to follow up. And we believe that we'll be able to find the balance of the funding for this project. The second phase, if you'll go to that next slide, phase 2, in round numbers, it's going to be a little over 17 million. And again, this is where we get the education building in, we do some additional infrastructure, and we go ahead and get those maintenance and greenhouse spaces built into the project. And then phase 3, if you'll go to that next slide, That's where we get to having the livestock space. The intention isn't to have livestock there 24 hours a day, 365 days a week, but it's to create a space where we can partner with Extension and with other organizations to bring livestock in on a short-term basis so that our students can learn about the care of those animals and those kinds of things, but they wouldn't be there full-time. In addition to that, this is during this phase, this is when we pick up the CDL trainers, the trails, the picnic shelters, and those other components. So if you'll go to the next slide, there are only two more. There's a summary overall, right? So right now, if we phase this project, the overall cost are around $32 million. If we're successful in some of our requests that are outstanding at this point, and that we intend to make over the next 3 to 6 months, it will slightly reduce the cost of the project because we won't have, we'll get some economy of scale in terms of some of the infrastructure work. So there's potential for this overall cost to come down if we're able to identify the funding quickly now that we finally have all of the architecture and engineering design work done, okay? So if we go to the next slide, it talks a little bit about the small shortfall that we have for phase one. It's a little over $1.5 million, that's the shortfall. Again, we're optimistic. Just this week, we've had meetings with all of our federal delegation. We've been reaching out to our North Carolina delegation. We continue to do those things. We have a couple of grants that are outstanding. We are confident that this small gap for phase one will be addressed shortly. Last slide. These are the things that are going to happen going forward. We've got an Eda Grant, and again, we're focusing on federal grants that will allow for brick and mortar aspects of the project. And so there's an EDA application that we will resubmit now that we have all of our engineering work done. That's typically part of the submission process. We'll continue to connect with the folks at Golden Leaf. We've already had a conversation with the Danville Regional Foundation. We've made them aware of the cost changes, and they've indicated a willingness to come back to the table and reconsider an additional investment in this project based on the new overall project cost. We're also continuing to meet with our federal delegation. I've met with Burr's office, Tillis' office, Bud Hall's office. We're continuing to connect with all of those folks to make sure, and they still think this is a great project, and they're helping us identify other federal funds that would be a fit for it. Again, we met yesterday with Agricultural Commissioner Troxler. He gave us several good leads that we'll be following up on. And then, of course, there's the short session for the legislature. And so we will exhaust all of those options. And the very last bullet on there is that we may need to reduce the scope of subsequent phases, but that's not what our community has told us is critical. What we've outlined, what we've worked together with the architects and engineers, what we put together with input from our community is exactly what we need for today and moving into the future. And so we continue to be optimistic, although the overall cost of the project is greater than what we originally anticipated. I don't mind being told no, and so we will continue to knock on doors on behalf of this project because eventually we will get to the yeses. So that concludes my presentation about SEED, but I would welcome any questions that you might have about this overall project.
Go ahead.
I don't have a question about the project. I pretty much know all the ins and outs of that. And I do have a question about this blast program.
Yeah.
So when did you start that at Stony Creek?
So it's been probably a year and a half. So this past fall, and because of COVID, we've had some restrictions on how the students could interact, but the idea, and remind me, Emily, I'm so glad you're here. So remind me what the BLAST acronym stands for. And this is Emily Buchanan. She's our Caswell campus director, and she's kind of the face of Caswell County.
Breakthrough learning in agriculture, science, and technology.
There we go, that's it.
Okay, and is there a plan for expansion into other elementary schools as well?
You hit the nail, that's exactly. So what we're doing is we're also partnering with North Carolina A&T to really study how well students do as a result of participating in this program, we think that this is going to increase their reading, their math, their science scores, and their interest in agriculture, right? And so we're studying those things right now. We're tracking those things. We did a we'll do a post analysis of that. With that information, we'll be able to seek other grant funds to expand it throughout to other elementary schools and eventually to all the elementary schools in Castle County.
And this is really not a question, just a reminder. When you were talking about phase one, when did you say that possibility of beginning that, or?
So phase one, because the North Carolina Tobacco Commission has granted us dollars that are specific to the incubator farms, in 2022, we'll begin clearing that site and preparing those incubator plots. We're not waiting.
Thank you.
I have a question. It's kind of tied in with things you talked about, not the actual project. You mentioned the grants and you mentioned that your involvement in getting higher prices for eggs here locally for the farmers. I was reading an article this morning on Facebook. One of their farmers posted they were not going to farm anymore. Fertilizer prices have basically tripled in the last 2 years. Is there any kind of grant funding or maybe bulk buying that you could get the farmers together and lower the price? Anything we could do for them in that avenue?
Well, I wonder about Piedmont Progressive Farmers. I mean, there's already sort of a cooperative that's in place. They typically have that in place for buying or for selling their products. I'm not sure they've considered having that sort of a group for bulk purchases. But it's something that we probably want to, I want to check in with Travis to see if there are things that we can do. Would you mind forwarding that to Travis, to our co-op, to our extension director or myself, and let's check in with that farmer. That breaks my heart to hear that they're going to get out of farming because of those costs.
After the meeting, you'll get with me. I will give you the information.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you for the update. Very good, very excellent, great detail in there. On these phases 1, 2, and 3, do you have dates associated with those?
So we've been hesitant to put formal dates with them until more of the funding is lined up, because what could very easily happen is with one legislative allocation, we would have enough funding to do all 3 phases at once, which is, that's still our preference, is to do these things at once to save taxpayer dollars overall, and to do all of this infrastructure work at one time. And so we've been hesitant. The one thing that we can say is that for phase 1, for those incubator farm plots, that work, we're in the process right now of identifying vendors to do that work and to bring excavators on site and to remove the rocks and repair those sites. That will happen in 2022. But the other ones, I'm going to have to come back to you and give you an update with formal dates.
And did I actually see 18 plots there? Okay.
Now, that's what we've drawn, that's what we put, those are basically 1 acre plots, right? So depending on the number of people that have interest in those incubator plots, we may subdivide them. So they may end up being larger or smaller, but for purposes of planning, right now, that's how we've got it set up.
And are there any guidelines? I don't even want to use the word limitations, but on what can be put into those plots? Those plots just intrigue me. I think that's probably one of the most interesting parts of this whole project, when you can actually demonstrate that you can walk the talk. So I'm very, very interested in that.
So one of the things that I always encourage my employees to do when we have something new that we're not sure of is I encourage them to do R&D. And so basically that's rip off and duplicate. So that we're not starting from scratch. And that's exactly what we did, is we went to Orange County where they've already got incubators set up. And so we have a copy of their guidelines, and we've had conversations with them about what they've learned, what they do differently. And so we're basically adapting those same guidelines so that we have structure around what can be grown there, what are their responsibilities, what are their obligations, those kinds of things.
I'd love to see at a future date, maybe a slide that shows what those guidelines are, so we can help advertise what they are, not to limit.
I'll bring some posters too, so it'll be an even better advertisement for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any question?
Any more questions for Dr. Duncan?
Thank you all for your support and for believing in this. We're so excited about the future of agriculture and that we're just a model of how development gets done in rural communities. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will have the COVID update. Ms. Eastwood.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Morning.
Morning.
So we're finally starting to see our numbers come down, which is great. This surge has been particularly hard on the county. We've seen rapid spread. It seems like if you're listening in the community, everybody has COVID. But we're finally starting to see those numbers come down. We're starting to see some changes in mitigation strategies. Studies are still showing that the vaccine is helping to move us towards that herd immunity. Are going to expect to continue to see variants and subvariants. And so we will continue to work through those as they present themselves. This week is bringing changes to the school toolkit and how we work through contact tracing and case investigations. And so I'll be working with the school administration to make sure that we're following that toolkit the way we have been before. Have a meeting with them later today to talk about that. Does anybody have any questions specific to COVID?
Mr. Osterreich.
Good morning, Ms. Eastwood. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Do you have a number of the percentage of the Caswell? I know this is difficult. An approximation of the people that have been vaccinated fully?
Sure. Give me just a minute and I'll pull up the latest information on the dashboard.
I recognize that it's hard to get that number because you get people outside or from the county being vaccinated outside, et cetera.
Well, as long as they're vaccinated in North Carolina, we can capture that information. So when we look at Caswell County now, we have about 50% of our population has had at least one dose. And then 47% have been fully vaccinated. Well, with 2 doses and then the 1 dose or the 1 dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So that's where we are in Caswell County. When we break down the numbers as far as age wise, so it looks like the largest age bracket that is fully vaccinated is the 65 and up. And then it goes down from there. And when we looked at what was driving our cases through this last surge, it was mostly people who were in that 26 to 60 age group bracket that was where we were seeing the most cases. We weren't seeing that many cases in the 65 and up. And then even in the children, we weren't seeing as many cases as we were in that age bracket. So that was really what was driving our surge numbers. And I'm looking for the demographics for vaccine. Give me just a minute, I'll pull that up on the dashboard.
Well, a quick question while you're pulling that up. When you say fully vaccinated, do you mean the 2 shots of Moderna and the booster?
So on the dashboard, we're only capturing those two, the first series, the 2 shot series. When we talk about isolation and quarantine, the CDC changed their guidance. And so when we talk about being fully vaccinated, when we make decisions about isolation and quarantine, if people are eligible for a booster and they have not gotten it, we do not consider them to be fully vaccinated, and therefore we have to exclude them to place them in, if they're exposed, put them in quarantine. And so that's how we make those decisions. But for the purposes of the dashboard, it is just that original series, the 2 shot series, or the 1 dose for the J&J.
Thank you.
So when we look at our percent of fully vaccinated, well, let's see, this is just 1 dose. We're kind of split male, female, 51 to 48%. And then they don't give us a lot of other demographic data because it's suppressed, because it could consider to be identifiable information, because our population is so small. So they don't give us, except to say that we're at a 41% white, 54% suppressed populations. Any other questions?
Yeah. What are the general guidelines for masks, social distancing, and all that? Has that changed? Can you just kind of give us an update on where we need to be?
We're still seeing, we've talked about this this overlapping of mitigation strategies in order to help prevent the spread. And so vaccination and masking are the 2 right now that we're layering. So we still recommend masking, but you're starting to see a lot of states that are letting their mask mandates go. A lot of people are choosing not to mask now. But I mean, as far as the guidance is the same as it has been all along, and the recommendation.
Any more questions from Ms. Eastwood? Thank you, ma'am.
I'd just like to say thank you for trying to keep us healthy. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Health Department, Commercial Space Room, Mr. Miller.
Commissioners, I know this has my name beside of it, but honestly, for the purposes of the discussion, I would be doing it a disservice. We have Ms. Eastwood with us. I think she's better suited to cover this item than I am.
So we have a couple of programs in our health department that are care management programs. One is CAP, and CAP works with medically fragile individuals within the county, either children or disabled adults, to keep them in their home longer instead of in long-term care facilities. And so we have care managers who work with that population. Recently, we've talked about this before, Medicaid, this is a Medicaid only program, and Medicaid changed the way that those payments are made to the health department. Instead of billing per unit of work, we get paid per member per month. And so that program has gone from not making much revenue at all to having a lot of revenue, and such a valuable program to people within our community. The other programs that we have are care management programs that work with high-risk pregnancy, women who are in a high-risk pregnancy, and also children who are at risk. And we work with those children. These are also Medicaid-only programs. We work with those children and those pregnant ladies to make sure that they have healthy outcomes, to make sure that they're getting to their appointments on time, they're getting the medication they need, to work with them on their social determinants of health and making sure that their basic necessities are met, like housing and food security and things like that. And so these programs are really community-based. And what we're finding is that because they're located at the health department, the general perception is that people don't want to be a part of that because they're not health department clients. And so the general thought is if we could get them outside of the health department and into a more community-centered location, that those programs would be more successful and have a better outreach. So we've talked with a couple of places and spaces and investigate it. And so we'd like to ask for your permission to enter into a 3-year lease to bring those programs outside of our health department walls and out into the community. The space would have some classroom space where we could have educational sessions there as well, that people are sometimes hesitant to come to the health department building for. As much as we try, and as hard as it is in our plan to try to change the image of what the health department represents, we understand that it's still a little taboo in the community. And so this would allow us to have a community space that's not associated with our building.
Jennifer, and if I could just add one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but this has been vetted by the Board of Health and appeared before the Board of Health, and the Board of Health has approved this, correct?
Correct.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So just to back up a little bit, you said that these programs were making more money. Is that sufficient to cover the rent of this facility?
Yes, sir.
And the other question I would ask is, do you have any, I know there's going to have to be some construction or improving in those. So do you have any?
The construction, the build out of, it'll have to be a build out of a couple of office spaces. That's included in the lease agreement.
Oh, okay.
We would be responsible for heating because it's gas heat. So we would be responsible for heating, and we would be responsible for internet and that type of thing. Utilities is covered in the lease. I believe that's what he told me when we met with him, that the utilities are covered, but anything outside of that we would be responsible for. But the construction cost isn't included in that cost of that. And that's the reason he wants a 3-year lease, because he would be building those offices out for us.
Okay, thank you.
Is Mr. Farrell saying this?
Yes, he has a copy of it. He's had it from only a day or so, maybe 2. So I'm not sure he's had a chance to fully review it. Brian?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I have reviewed the lease. The health director got it to me. It is about a 30-page, what I would say standard commercial shopping center lease. It needs some work to conform to local government requirements, but I'm sure it's something that we can get in a form that's workable. Landlord, I'm sure, just sent their standard form for the center. So I've seen it and happy to work with the health director to get it in a form that's acceptable for the county, should you want to move forward with it.
Go ahead.
Ms. Eastwood, I was wondering, the cost of the lease or the rental of facilities, how many are we talking about? And presumably they'll be staffed through this additional revenue that you're seeing for.
Sure, we already have staff in those programs. They'll just be relocating to the new space. And the rent is $1,850 a month. And so we're looking at around $22,000 for the year, and then utilities on top of that.
And that's for one facility, or do you have?
Yes, it's just one unit that we would be renting.
And can you reveal the location of this?
Sure. It's actually up beside our testing site. It used to be a gym in that same shopping center, the Brightleaf Center where Goodwill is and Head Start, which makes it another good location because we do work with some at-risk children who may be a good location to work with some of our clients as they're coming and going. And to partner with Head Start to do other type of population-based health classes or educational activities. It would be a good location, but it's in that space that's right beside our testing center.
Any more questions? If not, thank you, Ms. Eastwood. We'll move to payroll discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we need to at least, as a board, say move ahead or not. Do we need to at least acknowledge it? We would have our attorney to go ahead and work on that lease and get with Ms. Eastwood and then bring that back before us, or what's the consensus?
Mr. Chairman, you can, if it's the board's intention to approve it, you can approve it based on county attorney review and approval.
That's what I thought Mr. Farrell was doing, was reviewing this now to bring it back to us.
Yeah, I would not want to vote on it today because I just simply haven't had time to look over this, and I would rather wait until we get the actual lease agreement as well to make sure from our attorney. So
that's the reason I was going to move on.
Yeah, well, I just wanted our attorney to be aware that we want him to go ahead and proceed with getting that lease corrected, reviewed, and then brought back before us. Is that?
Yep.
Okay.
Very good. We'll work on it and bring it back to you as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on again, payroll discussion, Mr. Miller.
Commissioners, Commissioner Jeffries and I have had several conversations about the new payroll system and how it's been implemented, what effects that has had on our employee base. And Commissioner Jeffries has suggested that we have an additional meeting at the library to discuss this issue and have department heads speak on the payroll issue as well. So I guess this is to come to a consensus about having the meeting and a time and date to have the meeting. Do you have anything to add, Commissioner Jeffries?
I also want to add, well, here we can't hear, and then go ask me to go back to the old commission room, let the code, I want to put that on the agenda to talk about.
Yeah, back to the library room?
Yeah, library.
Yeah.
You need a consensus to do that, or pick a date, or what?
Yeah, if the board wants to have a meeting and we move forward, we just need to know a date to schedule the meeting.
I have no problem with scheduling such a meeting for payroll issues.
Do you need a consensus?
I think it's an excellent idea. I've had 4 phone calls from county employees that have had problems with their paychecks, and I think that if we could get this out in the open and discuss it, and like Mr. Jeffries said, in an environment where everybody can hear properly, I believe we can get to the bottom of it, try to straighten this thing out.
Sounds great. Do you want me to contact you individually to choose a date and time?
Throw some out now.
We can kick it around now. Gentlemen, Fridays work best for me. That's the day that I can easily put it in my schedule.
You said Friday, yes, we
Friday is best for me.
don't have a problem.
What's the pleasure on the date? Sir,
What about next Friday?
19th,
18th.
18th, I'm sorry, 19th Saturday, 18th.
Friday the 18th at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that would be at the library?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Just so the board's aware, and it doesn't really matter to me because I've been in discussions about this before, but I have a work conference on the 18th and 19th, but you guys can proceed with this discussion. It's fine with me. Go ahead and set the meeting for then and have it done, because we've been in discussions with Mr. Jeffries and I've been in discussions with the county manager. So then I can review what's said when I get back.
Any other comments? If not, we will proceed to have this on the 18th. All right, let's plan to set it up for then, Mr. Miller. Action items, county manager's update.
Commissioners, I just have one update for you, real quickly. I wanted you to know about some of our CARES Act money that was being spent. You know, a lot of the CARES Act money came to the county, right, to be spent. Well, we also had departments to receive specific allocations of CARES Act money. One of those departments was our Caswell Area Transportation System. They're taking a proactive step and using that CARES Act money for an approved item, and those items are filtration systems to go on their buses, on the vehicles that they use to transport individuals on a daily basis. They're HEPA filtration systems. So the expense of that's $12,895. The CATS already has the money. It was CARES Act money. So we're going to move forward and put those HEPA filters in the vehicles.
Any questions from Mr. Miller? All right. Commissioner comments. Mr. Dickerson, do you have any?
I would want to throw this out there for all of us to be thinking about. We have some budget pressures that are on the horizon. You've got a coming tax increase to pay for the new high school. You've got $18 million that's got to be paid back. We have county employees that has a pay review in process now. All this money is going to have to come from somewhere. And in an environment where we got 7% inflation, we need to be looking at our budget and looking at our revenues and trying to figure out if there are ways that we can save money in the departments and try to find a way to accomplish these commitments that we're about to have to address without going back to the people in this county and trying to tell them they have to pay higher property taxes. If we can minimize that, it works out well for everybody. If we go to these people that are being hit hard with a 7% inflation, all of us see when we go to the pump, we go to the grocery store, it's easy to say, well, we got to, spend money here, but it's got to come from somewhere else. And I do not want to be in a position where we have to go to our county taxpayers and say, hey, we've got to have more as a government to fund our needs, and we're going to take it from you even though you're struggling yourself. Things require money to progress. I've got that, but at the same time, we've got to be ever mindful that people cannot bear such a tax burden in this county. And I just want to throw that out there, have that back everybody's mind as we go forward.
Thank you. Mr. Hall? Mr. Jeffries?
The only thing I got is like to maybe start working on a budget a little earlier this year. We fight to the last year of June to get the budget back.
Yes, sir. Mr. Otter?
I have to echo Commissioner Jeffrey's comments that the sooner the better on that. That's all.
Mr. Oliver?
No, sir.
Thank you. Announcements and upcoming events. February the 21st, Board of Commissioners meeting at 6:30. At this time, I will entertain a motion to go into closed session.
I so move, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion and a second to go into closed session. We will do roll call voting.
Mr. Chairman, my video button's not working here. Sorry about that. But while you go in, I'd also like to add an attorney-client privileged item to receive legal advice in the matter of Juwan Barber versus Caswell County in the case number 22 CBS 21.
Okay. At this time, we will do roll call voting. Mr. Dixon? Mr. Howell? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Owen? Mr. Odenstriker? Mr. Bay? Aye. We now sit in closed session. We now sit back in open session. Is there anything else for open session? If not, I'll entertain a motion to dismiss.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor by roll call voting, Mr. Dixon? Mr. Howell? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Owen? Mr. Odenstriker? Mr. McVeigh? Aye. We're now adjourned.